Okay, welcome back here. We are going to dive into exercise 22, which is the digestive anatomy. And so you'll see I will talk a little bit about some of the physiology. I try to focus more on the anatomy and the gross anatomy in lab. However, the physiology in the digestive system just kind of goes hand in hand with anatomy. So it's hard to not talk about the two. So I would try not to make this too lengthy, but hopefully this will really tie the lab and the lecture together with this video. So the main function, obviously, of the digestive system is to convert food into a form of energy that the body can use. And so it's going to do that by digesting food, dissolving it, dividing it into its like simpler parts, and then absorbing those simpler parts and then distributing them throughout the body via the bloodstream. So that's a main function of the digestive system. So the digestive system, when we talk about it as a whole, kind of consists of these two parts. So it's going to consist of the actual GI tract, what we call the gastrointestinal tract, which is the tract that runs from mouth to anus. So mouth, down pharynx, esophagus, stomach, into your small intestines, into your large intestines, and then out the rectum and anus. So that's the gastrointestinal tract, or what we also call the GI tract, or sometimes you hear it called the alimentary canal. You usually hear it called the GI tract in more medical settings, and then in more research settings or biological bench research settings, you'll hear it referred to as the alimentary canal. So just again, I know sometimes there are two different, I like you to know both terms because you never know where you're going to end up. So alimentary canal, gastrointestinal tract, GI tract, all the same thing. So that is the kind of continuous tube from mouth to anus, right? And I also like to call this the donut hole. So if you could picture, this is the GI tract is the donut hole, because there are some things that go in the donut and out the donut hole and are never absorbed, like fiber. So there's certain types of fiber that are never digested and absorbed through your GI tract. So it literally goes right through the donut hole. So that's one way to think of the GI tract, is it's the donut hole. And then the second part of your digestive anatomy is all the accessory organs. So these are all of the organs that are going to help to support digestion by, either secreting enzymes or secreting mucus or other substances into the GI tract. And so usually they're connected to the actual GI tract through like a series of ducts. And so these types of, when we talk about the accessory organs, the types of things that we're going to be talking about are your like teeth, we'll talk about your tongue, we'll talk about the salivary glands. Then we'll also talk about the liver. Here you can see the gallbladder in green here. We'll also talk about the pancreas, which is this little yellow organ here underneath the stomach. And so those are some of the main accessory organs that we'll discuss. So they're not part of the GI tract. They just produce secretions and dump them into the GI tract, if that makes sense. So before we get too far into that, I just want to do a reminder before we get into, and we'll first, when we go through the lab here, what we'll do is we'll first talk about the GI tract, and then we'll go into the accessory organs. So just to kind of keep it organized and break it up that way. But before we even get into the GI tract, I just want to talk a little bit about the peritoneum. So the kind of outer linings of the abdominal cavity as a whole. So remember that we have these different serous membranes. And so we have, for the heart, remember we have the serous membranes, the double layer serous membrane called the pericardium, right? Then we have the double layer serous membrane around the lungs called the pleura. And so for the abdominal cavity, it's going to be the peritoneum, okay? And just like, again, the pleura and the pericardium, here it's going to be a double layer. The inside, the more inner layer, the deeper layer is going to surround the organs, and that's going to be called the visceral layer. And then the outer layer is going to be called the parietal layer. And that's the layer that will be kind of outlining the abdominal cavity. So this is kind of nice because they blew up what's called the peritoneal cavity. So the peritoneal cavity is going to be this space in between the visceral peritoneum and the parietal peritoneum. So again, the peritoneum is these double membranes, and we break it up into, and in this diagram you can see it really well, the parietal peritoneum, which is in red here, and then it folds back on itself, and then you have that inner fold is going to be the visceral peritoneum because it's right around the viscera, right? The viscera means organs. And then you have the space in between, which was enlarged here, so it shows in yellow. That space is the peritoneal cavity, and that's going to be filled with that serous fluid. And so just like your other serous cavities, here the same thing. The abdominal organs are going to be contracting. And because they're going to be contracting, you don't want them rubbing up, especially these important abdominal organs like the liver and the stomach. You don't want them rubbing up against other things in the abdominal cavity that might damage it, especially because it's constantly going to be contracting over time, right? And you don't want friction to damage those organs. So you have this nice gelatinous serous fluid in that peritoneal cavity to help kind of buffer those organs as they contract from friction. So again, the same purpose here. So you can see here is kind of a better depiction, more accurate depiction. This one was nice because it shows, it really shows the peritoneal cavity, but obviously the peritoneal cavity is not that large. So here is kind of a better depiction of what you might see if you were looking at a transverse section through the body here. So remember all your different sections to be a transverse section here. And if you were looking, again, it's basically like you've cut your body into superior and inferior halves, and you're looking in to the abdominal cavity. You can see here's the liver, here's the stomach, and what's lining, right, directly around those organs is that visceral peritoneum. So in purple here is the visceral peritoneum. And then you can see it's going to fold back on itself. That peritoneum is going to fold back on itself. And then here's the parietal peritoneum. And then this space, right, in between the visceral peritoneum and the parietal peritoneum is the peritoneal cavity. And that peritoneal cavity is what's going to be filled with serous fluid. Okay, so hopefully that kind of helps you picture those. Sorry, I spent a little more time on that than I would have liked, but everyone seems to have kind of trouble with visualizing the peritoneum. So it's important to be able to understand why we have the peritoneum and its function. So then we're going to get into some of the peritoneal folds. So, and the peritoneum is important because it also helps to kind of hold your abdominal organs in. And this is important because if you, for some reason, have some type of penetration to the abdominal cavity, you can have evisceration of your abdominal organs. And that's because you have a breakdown in that peritoneum and the peritoneal folds. So a lot of times, again, you can have either evisceration or protrusion of the abdominal organs, especially, your intestines and the small intestines, and that becomes a big medical emergency. So I actually have, at the very end of this video, I do have a short video because I know some of you are interested in paramedic EMT type degrees. So I do have a short video on kind of what to do. It's kind of an interesting video on what to do if for some reason, you were to come upon a scene and you had someone that had protrusion of their abdominal organs. So anyway, kind of interesting. Okay, so now we're going to talk about things that help to hold and anchor the digestive organs. And so we have these large peritoneal folds, these folds of the peritoneum. And they're important because they help to anchor the digestive organs, not only to the actual abdominal wall, but also to each other. So, for example, we have this fold of the peritoneum called the mesentery. And this fold here is actually going to help attach the small intestine, which is here, okay, to the posterior abdominal wall, helping to anchor the small intestine, which you're going to find is quite large. Also, we have what's called the mesocolon. So here you can see this is the mesocolon right here. And the mesocolon actually attaches the large intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. So that's another very important one. And then we also have, if you look back over here, something called the falciform ligament. The falciform ligament is going to attach the liver to the anterior abdominal wall, helping to hold it in place and anchor it in place. And then we have what's called the greater omentum. So here, this is all greater omentum and the lesser omentum. Oh, I like how I wish I could make my pointer large like that. Oh, I have no idea how I did that. But anyway, so the greater omentum is here. And the greater omentum is the largest of your peritoneal folds. And it actually attaches the large intestine, you can see down here and here, to the stomach. So again, helping to attach organs to each other. So that's the greater omentum. And it really helps also to kind of hold in these small intestines as well. So then we have what's called the lesser omentum. So again, here's the greater omentum. And you can pull up that. So here you can see they pulled up the greater omentum. But if you pull down the greater omentum, it covers all the small intestines. And so again, it's helping to anchor and attach the stomach to the large intestines here. And then you have what's called the lesser omentum. And the lesser omentum is not shown here. It's not depicted here. But basically, the lesser omentum would be in between the liver and the stomach. And so, again, it's helping to anchor those two organs in place from each other. So, again, the lesser omentum, if you kind of pulled apart the liver and the stomach here, you would see the lesser omentum connecting those two. Okay. So that just gives you an idea. Oh, this is kind of cool because this is actually a cadaver. So if you look here in this one, you can see this is mesentery. So the mesentery, again, is going to anchor. This is part of the jejunum and the ileum, some of the small intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. And then here, this is actually mesocolon because here's some of the ascending colon into the transverse colon. And this is actually going to attach the colon to the posterior wall as well, the posterior abdominal wall. So kind of cool to see some of that. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of, here you can see this a little better because here you can see the mesentery and then this would be mesocolon back here. So here's definitely some mesentery for your jejunum and ileum, and then there's some mesocolon. So kind of cool. So let's see. Let's get on to the rest of the GI tract. So now what I'm going to do, now that we've kind of introduced the first half of kind of how abdominal organs are kind of held together, now we're going to actually get into the GI tract, and then we'll get into the accessory organs. So the GI tract, remember, is the donut hole. And so food is going to move, obviously, into the oral cavity through the mouth. And we'll talk about the teeth as an accessory organ for digestion. And then we'll talk about salivary glands as well. Some of the salivary glands that are important for chemical digestion, which is going to be done through enzymes that will break down foods. And so that's going to, so when people ask where does digestion start, digestion starts in the mouth. And it starts with both mechanical digestion, right, with the teeth, and also with chemical digestion through the secretion of enzymes in saliva. So we'll kind of come back and talk about saliva and the salivary glands when we talk about accessory glands. So again, food's going to move through the oral cavity, okay, and then into the oropharynx through the fauces. And so here's the oropharynx. The fauces are just the opening from the oral cavity into the oropharynx here. And then from the oropharynx, food is going to be propelled down the pharynx through skeletal muscles that line the pharynx. So you're going to have skeletal muscles lining the pharynx, all of the pharynx. So remember, the pharynx is going to be broken up into 3 parts. We have the nasopharynx, which hopefully isn't involved with digestion of food, because that means you've put food in through your nose. So hopefully not involved there, but some of you have children, so you know, it might be. Food may have entered the nasopharynx. But hopefully it's just going through the oropharynx and then into the laryngopharynx. So, and I know I talked about these already in the respiratory system, so that's why I'm introducing them kind of briefly here. But again, food is going to be propelled through the skeletal muscles that actually line the pharynx. Now, as food moves from the oropharynx into the laryngopharynx here, what's important about the laryngopharynx is to remember is that we have this epiglottis, right? And that epiglottis should, during the swallowing reflex, which is triggered by the uvula, right? During the swallowing reflex, the epiglottis should trigger to close off the opening of the glottis here. The glottis is the opening into the trachea. And so that should prevent food from going into the trachea and direct food down into the esophagus. Or again, we talked about, my kids call it an epiglottis malfunction if for some reason you choke because food has entered the trachea and has to be coughed back out. So again, that epiglottis should cover that glottis. Food should move from the laryngopharynx down into the esophagus. Now, as food makes its way into the esophagus, you're going to transition from skeletal muscles propelling food into smooth muscles that propel the food. And you probably can remember from lecture, we talked about their circular muscles and in the esophagus, as well as longitudinal muscles in the esophagus that are going to help to contract sequentially to produce these wave-like contractions that we call peristalsis. And those peristaltic wave-like contractions are going to help to propel the food all the way down this long tube called the esophagus. So the esophagus is going to move and make its way down through the diaphragm. I'm going to cruise through a couple images here so I can show you what that looks like as it cruises. So here's the esophagus, right? And the esophagus is going to cruise through what's called the esophageal hiatus. So right here is the esophageal hiatus, where the esophagus actually goes through the diaphragm. You may not know that. So there are a couple other structures that go through or along the diaphragm. Here would be the inferior vena cava. Here would be the aorta and this notch here. But the esophagus actually moves through the esophageal hiatus here. So again, the esophagus is this nice long tube here. And eventually it is going to end up in the stomach. So let me go back here to this diagram. So again, here's the esophagus. Making its way down here. Let me go back up. Esophagus making its way down here into the stomach. Okay, and you'll notice I'm going to do this on a couple different models because in the lab we actually have a few different models for this, and so I want to make sure that you're familiar with all of the models. So as food moves into the stomach, it has to pass what's called the esophageal sphincter here. And so many of you probably know about the esophageal sphincter because this sphincter sometimes doesn't quite seal tightly. And so if it doesn't seal tightly, then you can get reflux of some of the acidic materials from the stomach into the esophagus. And this can cause inflammation in the esophagus, and it causes a condition called GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease. So that's why that esophageal sphincter is an important sphincter to know. I don't know if your book mentions it. I'm going to go ahead and mention it and show it to you here because I think it's medically an important sphincter to know. So then from the esophageal sphincter, we're going to move into this stomach, which is this J-shaped organ. Now, it's important to remember that the stomach is on the left side of the abdominal cavity. So it's in actually what's called the left upper quadrant. So again, I'm going to move back down here and show you this really briefly. So here you can see, here's the stomach. So you can see the liver, this massive organ, accessory organ, is in the right side. So the liver is going to be in the right upper quadrant. The stomach is going to be in the left upper quadrant. And this is important to know because if for some reason you have, especially if you're a paramedic, again, you're out there and you have a stab wound to the left upper quadrant, you do have to consider the possibility that that wound may penetrate through the stomach and you may be leaking stomach acid and stomach fluid into the abdominal cavity, which can, again, obviously be a serious emergency. So, again, important things to know there in terms of placement of the organs. So the stomach is going to be this rugged, I like to call it a rugged organ, right? It has to be because your food inside the stomach is being mixed and churned with gastric juices, hydrochloric acid, pepsin, which is a digestive enzyme that's going to digest proteins. Hopefully you kind of maybe got some of this from lecture already. But if you haven't watched the lecture, that's coming. I'll talk more about that in lecture. But that's all happening in the stomach. So it has to be this pretty, hearty organ. And when you look inside the stomach, there are going to be these ridges in here that we call the rugae. And the rugae are these ridges that are going to allow for the mucosa to stretch and accommodate these large volumes of food. It's also going to help in this churning process, this muscular churning process that the stomach has to do to mix the gastric juices with the food and break down that food. Okay. So as food moves through the body of the stomach into the pylorus region and then through what's called the pyloric sphincter, then it's going to enter. So here is the pyloric sphincter that is going to control the movement. Here's pyloric sphincter, control the movement of that food or acid chyme now into the small intestine. So then food now enters the small intestines. And here, as it enters here, this is all part of the small intestine. So all of this is the small intestine. The small intestines are about 10 feet long if you stretch them out from one end to the other. And the reason that your small intestines are so long and folded here is that this helps to increase and maximize surface area for absorption of nutrients, which is the primary goal of the small intestine. So that's why the small intestines are folded so long and narrow. And again, that helps to maximize our surface area for absorption. We'll also talk about other ways in just a minute of how we can maximize that surface area for absorption of nutrients. So when we break up the small intestines, we break it up into 3 segments. We first have the duodenum. Sometimes also you'll hear it called the duodenum. It just, again, it's like potato. So duodenum, duodenum, you'll hear them called both. Just depends on what type of setting you're in. So we'll use the term duodenum here. And so here in the duodenum, you probably remember from lecture that you're going to have glands that secrete mucus, and that's really going to be to protect the duodenal lining from the acid chyme coming from the stomach. So that's very important for the duodenum. And then the duodenum also, or duodenum again, I use both because you'll hear probably duodenum used more in the medical settings. But so here, you're going to see that, up here, you're going to see that you're going to have the entrance of ducts coming from the liver and coming from the gallbladder and coming from the pancreas to dump in its digestive enzymes. And so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the hepatopancreatic ampulla here that's going to dump into the duodenum or duodenum. So again, then food is going to move through the duodenum or duodenum into eventually the jejunum and then into the ileum. The jejunum is the middle segment, and then the ileum is going to be your longest portion. It's going to be about 6 feet, the longest portion of the small intestine. And the ileum is going to terminate in what we call, right here, here's the ileum, in the ileocecal sphincter. So this is going to be the ileocecal sphincter right here. And the great part about the sphincter, and many of the sphincters in the digestive tract, is that they're actually named after the two parts. So you're moving from the ileum to the cecum, so it's called the ileocecal sphincter or ileocecal valve, which is beautiful, right, when that happens. So if you know that this is the ileum and you know that this is the cecum, it's easy to remember that this is the ileocecal sphincter, okay? And so again, the main function of all of these digestive, or all of these, the small intestines from the duodenum all the way down to the jejunum and ileum, is that they are going to perform a little bit of the leftover chemical digestion, and they're going to do that through especially some of the enzymes that are secreted from the pancreas and from the liver and the gallbladder. And then their big function is to perform nutrient absorption. And so you'll actually see that to increase the nutrient absorption in the small intestines, they have these circular folds called the plicae. You can see them here, the plicae circularis. So these big folds, circular folds here, are called the plicae circularis. Plicae circularis. And so you can see, I don't actually have the word for you, do I? Let's see if they have it here. If not, you can look at it in your lab. It's, again, plicae circularis. So Plicae, and then circularis, Circulares. I wish I put it in there. But anyway, so those are going to help to increase your absorption. Sorry, this is your stomach. I used the other model. This isn't a great model anyway, except for here it does show the pyloric sphincter a little bit better. And then you can see the duodenum here. But anyway, so we're on the small intestines. And so you can see that within the small intestines, not only do we have the plicae circularis, which you see better in this model here. So you can see the plicae circularis. You have those folds, but then you have folds within the folds, right? So then on each of those plicae circularis, on those folds, you have a bunch of these things called the villi. And the villi are going to be these, again, folds to help increase your surface area for absorption. And then within each of these villi, okay, then you have more folds within folds. You have what are called the microvilli. So each of these villi have microvilli within them. And these microvilli, okay, are really where absorption is going to happen. And then you can see inside these microvilli, you have lymphatics and then the blood vessels running through there. So again, those are all important because this is where we need to maximize our surface area for absorption. And so we do it with these folds upon folds upon folds. We have the plicae circularis, and then within those we have the villi, and then within those we have the microvilli, which are shown here. So you can see how that gives us lots of, I'm always amazed. This is one of those amazing moments for me in anatomy of how we maximize, how our bodies are so efficient to maximize surface area within the small area of the abdominal cavity. So the intestines are just a perfect organ to do that in terms of maximizing surface area for absorption, especially the small intestines. So then we get into, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So then we get into the large intestines, right? So again, we go through the ileum here, and then the food dumps from the ileocecal valve into the cecum. And so an important part, I'm going to go back up here so you can see this a little bit better. An important part of the anatomy here to remember, again, especially if you're in emergency medicine here, is that in this right lower quadrant here, this is your right lower quadrant, you are going to find this sometimes troublesome organ called the appendix coming off of the cecum. So it's a little pouch-like structure coming off of the cecum. And that sometimes, again, becomes inflamed and infected and can cause a condition called appendicitis. So again, if you are out in the field and you have someone complaining of severe pain in the right lower quadrant, then appendicitis is always one of those things that's going to pop into your mind. Okay. And then you're going to run into the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and then you're going to run into, as you get down here into this S-shaped portion, the sigmoid colon. So that's a nice part. You can think of S-shaped sigmoid colon, okay? So those are kind of the main parts to the colon. And when you go through the colon, there's a couple flexures that are kind of important anatomical features to note in terms of a reference point for anatomy. So you have, as you go through the ascending colon, you have what's called the right hepatic flexure here. That's because hepatic refers to liver, and the liver would be here, right? So here's the right hepatic flexure. And then as you go through the transverse colon, then you have the left splenic flexure. And as you can guess, that's because the spleen is right here. So there's your spleen. So again, that's another important feature to know, that your spleen is there just below the stomach. It kind of goes stomach, pancreas, and then spleen off to the side here. And so those are the main structures of your large intestines. And the main function of your large intestines is, again, for absorption, but primarily for absorption of water in this case. And so you do have these pouches called the haustra, and these pouches are created by these three longitudinal muscles called the tinea coli. And the tinea coli are right here. Here's the actual term if you're a visual person like I am. The tinea coli are right here, and it's a series of these three longitudinal bands of smooth muscle that are going to contract and gather the colon into these pouches called haustra. And again, this helps to increase our surface area and maximize water absorption. So we're going to reabsorb as much water as we can to conserve that water, right, for the body in the large intestines. So the tinea coli are going to help to do that by creating these pouches called haustra. All right, so real quick, again, food is going to move through the colon when we talk about the large intestines, through the colon, up the ascending colon, around the right hepatic flexure, transverse colon, around the left splenic flexure, down the descending colon, into the sigmoid colon here. And then at the end of the sigmoid colon is going to be the rectum, okay? So the rectum is going to be this area that opens into the anal canal, between the sigmoid colon and the anal canal. So we're going to go through the rectum, into the anal canal, and then out the actual opening or hole that we call the anus, which makes my kids laugh every time. So again, that opening, the anus is just the opening. The anal canal is this portion here. The anus is just the opening. Okay, so that is the manner in which food is going to move through the GI tract. Okay. So then we get into all these accessory organs, right? And these accessory organs are important for the mechanical and chemical digestion of the food. So they're going to assist in the digestive process. So here we're going to get into the accessory organs, and the first accessory organ is going to be the teeth. The teeth, again, their primary function is just mechanical digestion of food. And each tooth is going to consist of two main areas. You're going to have the crown, which is going to be above the gum line, and then you're going to have the root, which is going to be below the gum line. So there's all the root. And the root of the tooth is going to be embedded in what we call the alveolar process, or the alveolar socket of either the mandible or the axilla. So this area here is called the alveolar process of the bone, the actual bone. So then when we talk about the different parts to the tooth, and this is always, I want to make sure I cover this because most students hint the questions on this when it comes to the exam for this model. So let me go through this, and this is important because I know some of you are going on to dental hygiene, and so that's why we spend a little bit of time on the tooth as well. So when we talk about the tooth here, some of the anatomy that's important is what actually anchors the root in place, and that's the periodontal ligament. So this right here, this structure right here, it looks like it's kind of pink with white lines right here. This is the periodontal ligament, and it goes all the way around here, periodontal ligament. And it is going to anchor the root in place. And it's going to line the alveolar socket to anchor that root in place. Then we have what's called the dentin. And the dentin is the calcified connective tissue here, right here. Here, this is all dentin here. This is all dentin here. If you look at number 20 is dentin, if that helps you out. And number 26 is the periodontal ligament. So periodontal ligament is number 26. Number 20 is dentin. And that dentin is a tough connective tissue that internally makes up most of the structure of the tooth, right? And then we have what's called the enamel. And the enamel forms the covering over the crown right here. So here's all the enamel. And that's what, right, when you try to protect when you're brushing your teeth. That enamel is harder than either the dentin or the compact bone. And obviously that's a protective structure for the tooth. The cementum is going to be in white here. So if you look here, the cementum is in white, and that's going to be this right here, this little lining right here. And that cementum, that kind of runs from that little white section, and then it's kind of yellow up here. So that's all the cementum. And that cementum is going to be an adhesive that connects the dentin to the periodontal ligament. So here, this cementum right here is going to connect the dentin here to the periodontal ligament. So that's what the cementum does. I like to say the cementum cements the tooth to the periodontal ligament. So it cements the dentin to the periodontal ligament. Okay, so hopefully that will help you with what the cementum is. Here's all the cementum here. Number 23 is the cementum. Then we have the pulp cavity, and that's pretty easy. The pulp cavity, but also very important to know the pulp cavity because this causes you the most trouble if you have some tooth decay, right? And that's because the pulp cavity is at the center of the crown, and it contains the pulp, which is this area where blood vessels and nerves, which cause the problems, right? The pain that you feel, the nerves and the blood vessels and the lymphatics run through the pulp cavity. And then they run down into, as the pulp cavity narrows, then we call this the root canal. Okay, so here's the root canal. So there's the root canal, and it also, again, it's containing the blood vessels and connecting the blood vessels here, and the lymphatics and the nerves up into the pulp cavity. So pulp cavity, root canal. Okay. So hopefully that will help you a little bit with the teeth and the actual anatomy of the tooth. Now let's get into the types of teeth. So the types of teeth that you have are going to be your incisors. So here are your first two incisors. And they're mainly for cutting during biting, especially like if you bite into an apple, right? And then we have our canines. And so here is going to be your canine. And those are going to be for tearing food. And then you're going to have your premolars, which are going to be for grinding. So here's your first and your second premolar. And then, if you're an adult, I should say, and then you're going to have the molars, which are additional for grinding. So here's your first molar, your second molar, and your third molar. So again, those are the types of teeth that an adult will have. Now, as a child, you're born with what's called, or well, I shouldn't say you're born with because you those teeth erupt, right, after birth sometime. So as a child, you have what's called deciduous teeth. And those deciduous teeth, or sometimes you'll hear them called primary teeth, or you can also hear them called milk teeth more commonly. More in anatomy, you'll hear them called deciduous teeth, which kind of makes sense because you think of deciduous trees, right? Lose their leaves. Deciduous teeth, your teeth get lost. So if that helps you to remember that. And for your deciduous teeth, you have, and I will write out this dental formula for you. You have about 20 teeth that will erupt and then also be lost sometime between 6 and 12 years. And then they'll be replaced with your permanent teeth. So the dental formula for if you are a child and you have your deciduous teeth is that you have 2 incisors. That will stay the same into adulthood. You'll have 2 incisors, although you still lose those deciduous teeth and they're replaced with adult incisors. But you have 2 incisors. And then you have the 1 canine. However, you have 0 premolar, 0 premolar teeth. And then you're going to have 2 molars, okay? And when we give you the dental formula, we're going to give you the dental formula of 1/2 of the mouth. We usually do the upper on top. So the upper half on top, and then we'll do the lower half on bottom, okay? So the dental formula for a child would be 2 incisors, 1 canine, 0 premolars, and 2 molars, okay? And so if you multiply that times 2 times the other half of your other side of your mouth, then you come up with 20 teeth, okay? So you have about 20 teeth as a child, deciduous teeth that you have to lose. And then those are replaced with your adult teeth. So as an adult, you actually have 32 teeth. So your dental formula would be that you have 2 incisors, okay, 1 canine, so that stays the same, but then you have 2 premolars and 3 molars, okay? And that's going to be the same for the top and the bottom. So that will give you a total of 32 teeth. So that covers teeth. Our next accessory organ that we're going to talk about is the salivary glands. And I'll give you a kind of fun exercise to do with your kids if they're brave enough to do that, or if you're brave enough to do it with them, to experience the digestion, the chemical digestion that occurs in the salivary glands. So the salivary glands are just these exocrine glands that are going to secrete saliva. And saliva is just this watery substance that helps to lubricate the food, assist in swallowing, but also it's going to start the chemical digestion process by secreting enzymes. So you have salivary glands that are going to secrete enzymes into your saliva. And so your salivary glands are responsible for and they have these ducts that dump into the oral cavity to produce your saliva. And we have 3 paired salivary glands. So we have the parotid glands here. The parotid gland is the largest of the paired salivary glands. And then you have the submandibular gland here. And then you have the sublingual gland. So on the model that we have for you guys, it mostly shows the parotid glands really well. It shows the submandibular gland really well, but the sublingual gland is just really not depicted very well here. But here's the sublingual gland. And so the parotid glands, the submandibular, and the sublingual glands are all going to secrete substances. So they're going to secrete the saliva and the enzymes into the oral cavity. And one of those major enzymes that they're going to secrete is an enzyme called lysozyme. The lysozyme is kind of cool because it lyses bacteria and helps to prevent overgrowth of oral microbial populations of bacteria in there. But also the other big one for chemical digestion is that your salivary glands are going to secrete amylase, what's called salivary amylase. And salivary amylase is going to help digest your starch. It's going to be the beginning of your carbohydrate digestion. And it's going to break down that starch into maltose, okay, which is a disaccharide. And that maltose tastes a little bit sweet. So what's cool is you can have, if you have saltines, now you have to buy saltines that are not salted for this to really work, because you can't have that salt flavor. So if you can buy saltine crackers that are chocked full of starch, right? And you buy the unsalted version of them, what you're going to do is you're going to take the saltine cracker. This is going to sound gross, but I actually used to have my Bio 100 students do this. You're going to take the saltine cracker and you're going to chew it up. Really let it mix in with the saliva. And then instead of swallowing it, you're going to spit it back out into a little cup. And then you can see that we would not be able to do this in lab now with COVID. But you're going to spit it back into a little cup. And then you're going to let it sit there for a couple of minutes. And what's going to happen is that gives the salivary amylase a chance to really help break down that starch into maltose. And then you're going to try it again and you'll taste that it actually tastes a little bit sweet. Now, maltose isn't really sweet, not like glucose, but it is a little bit sweet. And so you'll taste the difference between, you can actually re-eat that little bit of partially digested starch in your saltine cracker, and you'll taste some of the maltose, and then try just a regular saltine cracker and you'll taste the difference in sweetness. So it's kind of cool. You can have your kids, you're probably more likely to get your kids to do this, but it is cool. You can actually, I've done it myself, you can actually taste that maltose. So you can experience chemical digestion firsthand, which is kind of cool. Okay, so again, I'm going to try to keep moving here. So those are the salivary glands. Again, the ones that you're responsible for knowing: parotid, sublingual, and then, parotid, submandibular, okay, and then the sublingual. The sublingual, I wouldn't give you on a test, honestly, especially on this model because it's just not depicted well. But you could get the parotid and you could get the submandibular there. Okay. So those are the salivary glands. So then let's get into this other very important accessory organ called the pancreas. And the pancreas is going to be just posterior here to the stomach. So you can see here we pulled away the stomach and are looking in to the abdominal cavity. And here is the pancreas. And the pancreas has, remember, those pancreatic acinar cells that are going to have these enzyme secreting cells that are going to produce all of these variety of digestive enzymes. So it's going to release digestive enzymes that are going to break down, some carbohydrates. They're going to release enzymes that are going to break down fats. They're going to release enzymes that are going to break down proteins. They're going to release enzymes that are going to break down nucleic acids. They kind of release this whole soup of digestive enzymes. So the pancreas is really important for digesting many different substances, especially carbohydrates, because they have quite a few. Remember, the stomach will do a lot of digestion of protein. We're going to talk about it in just a minute. The liver and the gallbladder are going to do a lot of the releasing of enzymes that are important for digesting fats. The pancreas is really big for releasing carbohydrate, or for releasing enzymes that are going to break down your carbohydrates. So that's very important, a very important function of the pancreas and the pancreatic juice that's secreted. So the pancreas is going to produce those pancreatic enzymes, secrete those pancreatic enzymes and pancreatic juices into what's called the pancreatic duct. And that pancreatic duct is going to join the common bile duct to form what's called the hepatopancreatic ampulla, and then it will dump into the duodenum here. So now the pancreas, I know that many of you know that the pancreas also has a function in production of insulin. That's an endocrine function. So the pancreas is this cool organ that not only, again, is part of the endocrine system, but also part of the digestive system. So you're right that the pancreas, if you're kind of remembering that the pancreas is also an endocrine organ, it's both, right? Because the pancreas does have a separate set of cells, not the acinar cells, but the islet cells that are going to secrete insulin, the hormone insulin. So again, it has that dual function. But here again, we're primarily talking about it in the digestive system here. So then we've got the pancreas. That's one of your accessory organs. And then we've got the liver here, which I kind of just talked about. In the liver, it's important. It's this really large organ in the right upper quadrant. I'll show you that in just a minute. And remember, it's suspended from the diaphragm and the anterior wall by this falciform ligament, which they drew here in white. Okay, and there are so the liver, the main function of a liver is to produce bile, right? And that bile is going to aid in digestion of lipids, of fats, right? And so it's so important, that bile is so important, that what ends up happening is the liver actually will overproduce bile, and some of that bile will move back through the cystic duct, from the hepatic duct here into the cystic duct and into the gallbladder, so that that bile can be stored. Okay, and then as we need that bile, as we're doing the process of digestion, and we have the right stimulus for the release of bile, then the bile will be released through the cystic duct and into the common bile duct, and then out through the hepatopancreatic ampulla into the duodenum here. Okay, so again, that's how bile makes it into the duodenum, into the small intestine. Okay, again, very important part. Also important to note that the gallbladder here, right, is this green organ on the underside of the liver. And again, it can also cause issues if you happen to be unlucky enough to develop gallstones that actually block the opening of the cystic duct. And this becomes very painful as the gallbladder becomes inflamed. So again, that's on the underside of the liver there. So again, just as a reminder, bile is going to move into this. As bile is produced from the liver, it's going to move into this hepatic duct, and then it can go straight into the common bile duct and then into the duodenum, or it can go from the hepatic duct back into the cystic duct, into the gallbladder, and then eventually be released out the cystic duct, common bile duct, and into the duodenum. Okay. So just some interesting information there for that. And I think that is the end of what I needed to talk about for your lab. Yep, that was the last accessory organ that we needed to talk about. So I just have a couple more images here for you. So you can see, I like this one because it's the abdominal cavity as a whole. You can picture it being split, right? And remember, we're gonna split into, especially the 4 quadrants are what's most commonly used, especially if you're out in the field. And so that would be right around the umbilicus area, where the belly button would be. And so you would see that these 4 quadrants would split here. We'd have the right upper quadrant, again, which is your liver and gallbladder, the left upper quadrant, which is going to contain your stomach, pancreas just underneath it. And then you have the right lower quadrant, which is going to contain, again, large intestine, small intestine. Also here, if you can see, this would be where your cecum is and the appendix. So again, in that right lower quadrant, remember, you may, if you have some pain, again, appendicitis is always kind of a thought, right? And then you have the left lower quadrant where you're going to have the intestines and large intestine. So what I'll do too is I want to post a picture for you of, I do have 2 children with gastric tubes, so G-tubes, and I always say they have their own cheat sheet because they have a tube that goes directly, if they have feeding tubes that go directly into the stomach, which is called a G-tube or gastric tube. And so I'll actually put on a picture here at the very end of this so you can see that, and that might help you to remember also that the stomach is on the left side. But yeah, they're lucky that they always have their own cheat sheets. Even if they one day just have a little scar, they'll have their own cheat sheets for anatomy. So anyway, that's one image. And you can see here, this is kind of nice too. You can also see the small intestines, but you can see here would be the large intestines starting with the ascending colon, then across the transverse colon. And remember, this would be the right hepatic flexure. This is the left splenic flexure, then down the descending colon, and then into the sigmoid colon, or the sigmoid colon there. Okay. So this one, I think I was just showing you the esophagus here. You can see the diaphragm, that the esophagus does have to move through the esophageal hiatus. You can see here is the inferior vena cava. So here is where the inferior vena cava penetrates the diaphragm. Here would be the esophageal hiatus, and then there's the aorta. And this is the diaphragm as you're going down here. Here you can see, of course, this is the stomach, and I'm opening it up here to show you the rugae, those folds. You can also see the pancreas here and the pancreatic duct, and then you can see the spleen there as well. This is just another diagram of the intestines, so you can test yourself again on cecum, ascending colon, right hepatic flexure, transverse colon, left splenic flexure, and then down the descending colon into the sigmoid colon. Here is just a nice kind of diagram to show you what it would look like if you took out all of the digestive organs. And so here is a video. You can click on this link. It's a YouTube video, and it's actually a pretty great video on what to do. It's a paramedic video on what to do. Whoa, sorry, I didn't want to show you all that, but it does, you do have to go through the ads. So it's a great little video. He covers some basic abdominal trauma care. And I know that some of you are interested in emergency medicine, paramedic. So it's just, or, you know, you never know when you're going to come upon a scene where, you have a car accident. So again, just kind of interesting, interesting information. But for you, those of you that are EMT paramedic, I thought you might find this video interesting. You do not have to watch the video. It is not required. It won't be part of the exam and the lab video, or it won't be part of the lab quiz, I'm sorry. But it is an interesting video for those of you that are interested in emergency medicine. Okay, so that is the end of my video. If you have any questions on the digestive system, please let me know. I'm sorry that became a lengthy video, but hopefully you were able to go through that anatomy with me, go through it in your lab book. Do please use some of the diagrams in your lab book, are actually really great for this. So use them alongside this video with the models, or with the ThingLink exercises that I have linked in the actual module. And you do actually have, you can have your kids color it for you, and then you could just study it. But if you have kids that are pandemic schooling at home, you can have them color that diagram on page 254 of the digestive system, and it's a great diagram as well. Okay, let me know if you have any questions, and that's it.